Hello, and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or search desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I am really excited for today's topic. We are going to be talking about feeding journeys, and I have a guest, a lovely lactation consultant, Kassi, here with me today to talk about this topic. But I think it's a really important conversation to be had, especially in the light of my last guest episode from a few weeks back on mom guilt, because sleep, feeding, these are such emotive topics where we have these ideas of what we think things are going to look like, and then we have the reality of what they do look like, and so many factors outside of our control. And so, sleep, lactation, they are both close to my heart, and I think this is a really, really important space to talk about. So, Kassi, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. Do you want to start off with just sharing a little bit about your work as a lactation consultant, and then we'll jump right into the topic?
Yeah, sure. So I am an IBCLC lactation consultant. In a past life, I've worked as a doula, I've worked as a postpartum nurse. And so I just found like my love and my niche in lactation. I found myself supporting families in all their feeding journeys even before having one of my own, and my own lactation journey, which had a million challenges, just reinforced for me how important this work is. And I now work with individual families in my state. I live in Maine, and I also support doulas and other birth workers in the online space through my training program, teaching birth workers how to best support families, whatever their lactation and feeding journey looks like. So that's a little bit about me and the work that I'm focused on right now.
I love that. I love the dual supporting families directly, but then supporting some of the folks that are right there professionally, also supporting families as well, because so much of the information that parents hear in those early months are from the doulas, are from the other birth professionals and
Right.
new parent professionals that are in their space, sharing information. And there's a lot of misinformation about lactation out there. And there's a
Yes.
lot of misinformation about accessing lactation help, and a lot of
Yes.
barriers to accessing lactation help that shouldn't be there, right? But are there, are real,
Absolutely. Right.
and
Yeah.
that can really shape someone's feeding journey.
Yeah, it can. And a lot of people don't seek help early on. So I find that if we can help empower the people who are there early on, like doulas and other birth professionals, then we can just like have that many more touch points where people are getting good information early on before everything becomes hard and challenging and we have bleeding nipples and babies losing weight and things like that. So,
Yeah. I was saying before we started recording this episode that for me, nursing was one of the few things in my like birth, immediate postpartum experience that actually did go as planned. And yet, like, I can look back now and think about, like, I happen to know more than the average person going into my first lactation experience, thanks to my mom. But then my second one, because I was already a Lillet cheerlead leader, I was already doing peer-to-peer lactation
yeah.
support. And I had my lactation counselor, like educator certification. I was not an IBCLC at the time, but like I just remember the information that I was given that was so unhelpful. Like my daughter, my youngest, she had lost, I don't know, it was like 7% birth weight. at, I guess, what would have been around 24 hours. And like the postpartum nurse comes in and she's all like, you need to start pumping, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, I don't. And she's like, yes, you do. And I'm like, look, I have been hand expressing during this
Right.
induction that we were trying to do and had colostrum all over my hand, like everywhere.
Yeah,
And
I'm
I
good.
have a history of oversupply. I don't need to don't need to start pumping. Like,
Right.
I promise you, we're good. And I just think about like that, like ability to that not ability, that jumping in with information before even seeing where the family's at can cause
Yeah.
so much damage. Because had I started pumping like this postpartum nurse wanted me to do, I would have created so much more of an oversupply problem than I already
Right.
knew I was likely to have based on my oldest. And of course, every lactation is experience is different, but like that not pausing and coming in and being like, what's your lactation history?
Right. Right.
Could can make such a difference or it can be so problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no blanket solution for every person, and just like digging into if they do have a lactation history, and what are their goals, right? Because
Hmm.
maybe your goal is to avoid the pump at all costs, because there are certainly people who that is their goal. They've
Yeah.
had a traumatic experience with a pump in the past, and they're like, this time I'm just going to do it how it works. And they don't want anything to do with pumping. So I think it's
Yeah.
really important to ask those questions ahead of time.
Because feeding can look really, I mean, feeding journeys, feeding goals can look really different,
Yeah.
family to family. I don't know. Like, I feel like maybe you feel the same way, or maybe not, given the work that you do. I feel like I see a lot of honoring of different feeding stories, but I don't feel like that's necessarily true broader. Or maybe it is
Mm.
shifting. I don't know. I feel like I live in a little micro bubble on this one. Um,
Yeah.
because like I ask for feeding stories with every family I'm working with, right?
Yeah.
Just like ask for their birth stories because it matters. It intersects with sleep in so many ways, and I need that information.
Hmm.
And I'm like, oh, look, you're exclusively pumping. That's amazing. Like, how is that going for you? Do you have any questions? Like, your combination feeding, how is that going for you? Like, that's amazing. Your formula feeding, how is that going for you? Like, that's like, 'cause it's all amazing. And it is all sometimes carrying emotions, right? But
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I feel like there's so many different ways that feeding can go and how we feel about them. It, as the parent, right? Like,
Right. I think there are a lot of great providers out there who are encouraging all and supporting all types of feeding journeys. And I think that in some cases it's really hit or miss what providers people are coming in contact with during their journey
mhm.
too, because I feel like some of us in the birth world are trained to be a little bit more knowledgeable about lactation, and others maybe not so much, like especially as far as like pediatricians and OBs who aren't necessarily getting that specialized training. It
I always
can
just
feel like
assume
it's really hit or
pediatricians
miss. Yeah.
don't have the training. I tell my
Yeah,
clients that all the time. I'm like,
you do.
senior pediatrician doesn't really have any lactation or sleep knowledge, and if you
Yeah.
happen to find one of the ones that does, that's wonderful.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I mean in the sense that it's like hit or miss. But yes, I think that in general, people are more open to different types of feeding journeys now. And now it's like getting the word out more to parents and families. Like, you don't have to carry guilt around what your journey looks like. And yeah, it might stink that you imagined it to go one way and now we're going down this other way. But like, as a lactation consultant, my job is to listen to your goals, help you pivot at least momentarily, and then see if there's a way that we can kind of like steer you back onto your original path, even though it might look differently at first than what you imagined.
I love that because I feel like maybe there's still a myth out there that lactation consultants want everyone to be exclusively breastfeeding
Right.
versus most of the lactation consultants I know, if not all of them, want you to define your own goals and just help you feed your baby in a loving, you
Yeah.
know, way, right? In a
Absolutely.
connected,
Yeah.
loving way that works and feels
Yeah.
sustainable. Um,
Exactly. That feels sustainable. That is exactly how I would put it too, because you may have had this goal of exclusive human milk, exclusive latching, and things might look different. And then I feel like people start to carry guilt, or they want to go so hard for that goal that they set out for originally, that they start to feel overwhelmed and it doesn't feel sustainable. And I always like to talk to people when I like put a plan into place with them. Does this feel sustainable? Tell me about how it's feeling. Does adding one more pumping session in feel sustainable to you, or like it's going to throw you over the edge with your mental health?
I want to pause there and highlight two things that you just said there.
Yeah.
First of all, the guilt, because like I mentioned in the intro, my last guest episode was with a perinatal psychologist who specializes in mom guilt. And like, I feel like feeding is just one of these areas where we carry so much baggage
Yeah.
with guilt. Like, if it's not exactly to the like minuscule little detail how we expect it to be, we can just be so hard on ourselves
Yeah.
instead of recognizing like how much of this is outside of our control.
Hmm.
Um, and also how many pieces that are, I feel like, important to a lot of parents. Like we can take them into different feeding situations, even if it's not in the exact way that we thought it was going to look like, right? Like you
Right.
can bottle feed in a very responsive kind of nursing mimicking way, right? If you want the
Mhm.
skin to skin, if you want, you
Right.
know what I mean? Like you can take elements of some of the pieces and carry them into other feeding situations. The other thing I love there is checking and asking how it feels sustainable because I feel like some people really need someone to fight for them to
Hmm.
help them keep going when that is actually the really significantly important thing to them. And
Hmm.
some people need someone to help them have the confidence to say this is too much. And I think it
Yes.
can be really hard to know, is this somebody who needs help saying, I can't do this. This is not good for mental health versus is this somebody who's highly unsupported and needs a cheerleader to keep going and saying like, you can do this. If this is what you want to do, like
Hmm.
you can do this and I've got you. You know what I mean?
It is tricky. I feel like that's one of the hardest pieces of what we do, is figuring out and really listening and tuning in, and reflecting back on what we're hearing, and being sure that that's like that we're truly understanding what is the experience that this person in front of me is having. Not just assuming that they need a cheerleader when maybe they actually need someone to give them permission to cut back on some of the
Yeah.
things that they're doing.
Yeah. Cause man, some of the interventions to like help boost supply
Hmm.
are intense. Like
Yes.
they, especially if not carefully monitored and we're not time limited or you don't have a lot of support or you
Yeah.
find them particularly overwhelming for any number of reasons, like they're really intense.
Yes. Yes.
Like triple feeding? Ooh.
No, that's exactly where my mind went
Like
to.
maybe for 72 hours, fine, but like I've seen families triple feeding for weeks and weeks on end.
Yeah.
And like if that is really important to you, then of course you should be supported to do it.
Hmm.
And I've seen families triple feed on week on end because they didn't have the follow-up care to tell them how to get out of that situation. And then it's like, oh,
Oh, and it's
so
exhausting. I
exhausting.
didn't even understand. I did 2.5 days of triple feeding with my daughter. And after that, I was like, oh, this is what I've been telling people to do. Yeah. And even then, I felt so liberated when I got like the quote unquote permission from another IBCLC to just like do the triple feed every other feed, like not latch my
Mm,
baby every other feed. And it felt so liberating, to the point where I was, I think, so much more relaxed with the whole thing that my daughter ended up latching again. She hadn't been latching. That is why I was triple feeding. And like, I think I just got to a mental space where the anxiety went from like way up here to down here a little bit more. And she was able to like, I mean, babies are so receptive to that energy. So I think she, after
yes.
that, well, it started latching and we didn't need to triple feed anymore. So not that that's going to be the case for everyone, but I think that's just the difference that giving someone permission to take a break can make.
Well, and that like stressing parents out in the name of lactation intervention can backfire,
Right.
right? Because like we
Yes.
need to be relaxed for lactation hormones to do their thing and for babies to be relaxed enough to feed because they feed off our emotions. And so,
Yes.
like, stressing parents out with a lactation intervention without checking in and making sure that's really what they want to be doing, or that can we tweak something like every other feed, or right? Like,
Yeah.
don't triple feed between these hours, like something, right? That might
Right.
make it feel more manageable, but is still working towards your goal, right? Then
Right.
we don't like I feel like we miss that like nervous system piece of stressed
Mhm.
babies don't eat as well, stressed parents don't produce milk as well,
Yes.
stressed dyads are not going to feed as well or bond as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it's tough. I feel like sometimes there isn't like enough recognition for sort of moving through those like active intervention pieces and that time, and then
Mhm.
sometimes not enough recognition for like the different way that the parenting workload plays out with different feeding paths. I don't know. Do you see that at all? Like just generally like society, like I feel like exclusive pumping's a lot of work, right? Especially if you don't have a partner who's picking up some of the feeds on top of the pumping.
Yeah.
And I see that with my parents with sleeping, that like there's a lot of freedom if we have a really lovely working parenting team and a
Yeah.
baby receptive to both parents when we're talking about a pumping parent or just about not just a pumping parent and or a bottle feeding family
Mhm.
with formula. Um, but if all that's falling on one parent, especially exclusively pumping, then
Yeah.
it can be really like more work than exclusively nursing, like directly nursing body feeding parent.
It's so much work.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you have all the parts and the cleaning and the storing the milk and you still have to feed the baby.
Yeah, you have to pump, you have to get the milk out, and you have to get the milk in.
Yeah, you
And it's
still have
not at
to.
the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you're trying to like find the time to pump while you're trying to manage a newborn who's hungry and it's a lot. I absolutely somebody who has a supportive partner has a huge advantage in any lactation journey, like whatever your lactation or baby feeding journey is, having a supportive partner is a huge advantage in meeting your goals and having even more support, whether that's from sleep consultants, doulas, lactation consultants, is huge. And people who have the foresight, I think, or even like knowledge from past experience to put some of those supports into place prenatally is even better.
Yeah. I'm often telling parents because I teach a newborn sleep class and I do some work in the newborn period, but most of the time I'm parents like 4, 5, 6 months is like the youngest I'm like
Okay.
deeply working with parents. Like I see lots of older babies and toddlers. But I will like education wise and like pumping plan wise, I can wrap that into my sleep work. But I'll even encourage older like parents of older babies, whether it's nursing or exclusively pumping or combination feeding, that if they're really struggling with something, like let's get you in to see a lactation consultant. For like if you need a clinical plan, let's get you in with lactation consultants. If it's a matter of like how are we balancing feeding or pumping schedules, then that's easy to rope into sleep work because obviously like I can do it, but I'm not people's lactation consultant when I'm their like as their sleep coach.
Mm,
Like I keep those are not I don't do the clinical lactation stuff. I feel like if I could talk about it in a like a breastfeeding support meeting, then you know. But I'll people in and like just remember that
yeah,
like lactation support isn't just the newborn time as well, that there's times
true.
it's good to check in and create a plan if it's
Yes.
not if it's not falling into place, right? Or there's a new
Mhm.
thing that's coming up. And that can be really
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. Going back to work is a huge time of transition for a lot of families.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
I think what you just said is super important too for families to understand the difference too of like truly developing a clinical relationship with a lactation consultant versus asking general lactation advice to anyone, including online, because I think a lot of people, like I have a YouTube channel and a lot of people ask me questions in the comments on videos, and it's so hard to answer a lot of feeding
Yes.
questions without the background, without knowing like what their medical history is, what the baby's medical history is. So it's really hard to give blanket advice to people who, especially people who are struggling with a more complex situation, to just be like, oh, your baby needs to eat 6 to 8 times a day. That's not the case for every baby. It might be really different based on like a supply, but there's so many factors
Mhm.
that go into it that like sometimes when you're struggling, it's really important to find someone that is going to actually develop that clinical relationship with you and put a personal plan into place.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when I'm working with the families that I do, I'm like, if it's about how feeding intercepts with sleep,
Mhm.
that's easy for me to do because I am a lactation consultant. We can definitely do that.
Right.
But if it's like we need to observe a feed, we need like a weight check here, we need someone to check oral function, that kind of stuff, then
Yeah.
I'm like, or you're actually concerned about your supply, that kind of stuff, then I'm like,
Yeah.
go. Like I'll help you find someone good in your area, but we need like a ground up, just like proper lactation
Right.
consult,
Yeah.
and fresh eyes. And it's lovely. I love it. I love when I can find someone really good and connect them local to them, and
Yes.
or
That's
virtually,
important.
depending on what the issue is,
Yeah.
and have
Yeah.
them connect.
Yeah, there are definitely some things that are easier to manage virtually than not. That's for sure. I think in person, definitely for anything like weight related, because you can do those pre and post weights is huge. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, for me, with my older baby clients, a lot or families, a lot of times it's like, did anyone check your baby for a tongue tie? Like, have we
right.
had a proper
Huge.
oral
Hmm.
functioning? Like hands in the mouth. Like, is anyone really properly not just peeked in? I catch a lot of tethered oral tissues with older babies,
Yep.
where I'm
Because
like,
those are the ones having sleep issues.
where I'm like, something feels off here. I'm not diagnosing your baby, but I think you need to get into somebody who can like really get in there and look at it
Yeah.
because something's not adding up here, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're working with them at that 4 and 5 and 6 month mark and it hasn't been caught, that's usually, it's usually either related to sleep or related to like trying to introduce solids where we're
Yes.
starting to pick up on that.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, you know, parents like navigating some of the trying to figure out how I want to get this out. It's to come out. Um, we kind of come into this is a bit of a topic change, but we kind of come into to parenting. I feel like a lot of us with, our ideas about eating. And then like we were talking about, we get different problems or barriers that might come up and we get interventions and we things like that. But I feel like there are a lot of decision points where we're asking maybe ourselves as a parent, like what our right next step is, sometimes without the best support. Not everybody has an
Yeah.
amazing lactation consultant or a supportive partner or a supportive mother or mother-in-law or, best friend.
Yeah.
What would you say to parents when they're just trying to decide, like, what is their next lactation step or next journey? Not just in the newborn phase, but just, moving forward. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think finding local resources, finding like support groups, the HA League, just finding a community around you where you can bounce ideas off of other parents. And there's usually someone who leads the group who can also offer insight, but you can hear what other families are going through and not feel alone in your decisions, even if you might not have access to work with a lactation consultant one on one directly. Maybe you don't even need that level of support, but having connection to other families going through similar things, or maybe they've gone through similar things in the past, can just make you feel less alone and maybe
Mhm.
give you some clarity around making those decisions or pivots that you might need to make during your parenting journey or your feeding journey.
I love that. I think it's really easy to feel isolated,
Yeah.
even for things that like you or I might see as very common.
Hmm.
As a parent, you don't, you're not seeing, we're seeing a specific cross section of the parenting population. And as a parent, you're not seeing those same patterns. And so like I can say, oh my gosh, so many of my parents struggle with XYZ when it comes to
Yeah.
sleep or XYZ when it comes to feeding. And then the parent themselves are like, I don't know anybody
Yeah.
struggling with
What's
this.
wrong with me? Am I
Yeah.
alone in this? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then you go to like a feeding group or breastfeeding support group, and suddenly you're around a lot of people grappling with the same thing, which is really lovely. And
Yes.
then you're like, wait, what? I'm not the only person whose baby is doing this or who's struggling with, nursing aversion or like whatever it is that we don't talk about as much. And it can be so
Yeah.
wonderful.
And even if the situation isn't identical, the emotions are going to be similar around any parenting struggle, and recognizing that, like, oh, this guilt or this anxiety or this feeling of I lost myself in postpartum, like all those things are very common threads that uh, can be really nice to feel like you're not alone in it and that someone else is feeling that way too.
Yeah. And I think it can be lovely to have like those mixed aged groups. And then it
Mhm.
can be lovely to have those more narrowly aged groups, right? Like one of our big lactation groups near us has like a 0 to 4 month, and then they have a older baby and they have a toddler group. And of course, the 0 to 4 month
Cool.
is like a weekly group, and the other ones meet a little bit less often.
Mhm.
Um, and then I'm also used to like the more La Leche League style model where it's like we have families with all age babies and toddlers.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like there's a really lovely feel to both of those different types of
Yeah.
energy with more mixed aged babies versus the narrow ages, and they can both be really nice.
That's cool. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's
Yeah.
really neat. I think I'm glad we're talking about this because I feel like, at least right now, we have kind of a group of parents who maybe even were parents recently within the last 3 years, and maybe like went through their first shot at postpartum and parenthood during the pandemic and
Yes.
didn't have the option of having these support groups. And I was one of those people. So I feel like now, if I were to have another baby, that's the first place I would go. Like, community. Where's the community? Where can I build a group of people who can really like support me during this time?
Yeah, it's an interesting point because I feel like the plus of the COVID years was a lot of the stuff moved virtually,
Hmm.
and some of it has stayed virtually.
Hmm.
And I think that can be really good. The minus is it all moved virtually and it's not the same.
Yeah.
And so virtual parent support groups are both, I think, a wonderful thing
Hmm.
and lacking some of that energy and connection that you get in person,
Yeah.
but also sometimes easier to get to
Yep.
than an in-person thing. Like I'm just thinking about like some of the big ones near me in DC, aside from the Leche League, which is more centrally located to me, our meetings. But like I would have to get on the metro and go
Yeah.
like downtown to the breastfeeding center if I'd wanted to go in person to one of their meetings. I
True.
wasn't going to do that with a baby in the first few months. Personally,
True.
like I
Yeah.
wasn't going to do that.
Yeah.
Um, but there's something special about being in person that you don't quite get the same for virtual. But we've kept our DC La Leche League meetings are virtual, and we've kept them virtual.
Nice.
And we get people from all over the country. We have a baby meeting and a toddler meeting each month or most months, and we get, mostly DC area folks, but we also have people who move away who keep coming, and we have people from other areas. And like there's something really lovely about that also. And as someone who
Yeah.
is a leader, it's really lovely to like turn off the computer and then go wrangle my kids to bed. So
Yes.
just, there's definitely pros and cons to both.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, at least we're talking about the fact that virtual is still out there too, because I don't even think that during the pandemic, connected much with virtual groups, and just knowing that they're out there, and even if it's not local to you, you can join a group in DC virtually if you want to, even if you're from somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like community is one of the pieces so lacking, like not just
Mhm.
feeding, really just new
Yeah.
parenting related. And the more ways we can build it, the better, right? Like obviously in person is invaluable, but I mean it's like it's so important. But the more ways we can give opportunities to connect with other parents so that we do normalize and know like, hey, it's normal to struggle. It's normal for babies to start getting more fussy around, 6 weeks. It's normal to experience I don't know off the top of my head a good example, but it's
So
normal.
many things. Yes.
All the things are normal.
All the things. And everything changes. You figure one out and then a new thing comes up. And that's like, I think one of the hardest things in the newborn phase is that it's all new to you and you're a new parent. But like as you go on with parenting, like you figure out one hurdle and then another one comes up, and then you're like, oh, this is not just about feeding and sleeping. This is parenting.
Yes, it's
So
life
then, like,
changing.
making sure beyond that first 6 months that you stay connected with other parents. Like, I don't know, in my community, I found a couple of moms when I used to take my daughter swimming at the YMCA, and we used to just like talk about mom stuff. So,
I love that.
yeah.
I love that. But yeah, it is constantly changing, right? There's always new
Yeah.
stuff coming up. And in those
Yeah.
newborn phases, it's so fast. Like I remember one of my very, very good friends um had a baby during the pandemic and saw a lactation consultant in the hospital and was home and was texting me some questions. And I was like, you should get like a lactation consultant. And she was like, I don't know. I'm like, she's like, I saw in the hospital. I'm like, but your baby's 7 days old now, or 6 days, like something like
Yeah.
that. I was like, everything is different. I was like,
Yes.
come on, we're in DC area. We got home visits. Like this is easy peasy. They'll take your insurance. It's not a big deal. And she was like, oh. I was like, it's like you have a completely different baby and a completely different like breast, basically at
Yes.
this point, right?
Yes.
Like
7 days later, absolutely.
and she was like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. And I'm like, we should be having like regular checkup through the newborn period, like regular check-ins because it changes
Mhm.
so fast.
Yes,
Like just
absolutely.
latching changes so fast from those newborn days through like if you get
Mhm.
engorged through like your milk, increasing and it's all new.
Oh, yeah. And that first 10 days to 2 weeks, I would say, like day to day, everything's new.
Yeah.
And so, absolutely encourage people to have regular check ins and contact with the lactation consultant if that's available to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Or hopefully one day we'll be at the point where everybody who comes in contact with a new parent knows all the basics of lactation and all the basics of normal newborn sleep. And so everybody they'll come in
Mhm.
contact will be able to validate what's normal. That is like,
Right.
it is one of my
Mm.
dreams. We're so far away from there, but
I know. I'm like,
it is one of my dreams that we will not have to fight like an uphill battle with other providers, information being inaccurate someday.
or how great would it be if it was just a requirement that a lactation consultant or someone lactation educated had to work in a pediatrician office?
Yeah.
Every pediatrician office, just so someone was knowledgeable about feeding babies
Yeah.
in that office.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
my first pediatrician, when my oldest was born, I love her. Like I still miss her. We switched insurance, and so we only had her for 2 years, but she's amazing. And like she was just one of those great pediatricians who knew what she didn't know. And
Nice.
like, if she had a question, she would not hesitate to like look up a guideline or go see if she could snag one of the lactation consultants or, just not have to know everything, which I think is so important
Yes.
because that like you can't know everything, and that was just it was so lovely to
It
just
is
have that,
lovely.
where she's like, oh, let me do some research on that. And let me see if I can grab we have a, nurse that is also an IBCLC. Let me see if I can grab her, when my son was
That's so
refusing bottles
nice.
when I went back to work.
Yeah.
She was like, you've exhausted my knowledge. Let me go see if I can grab.
So important as providers to be able to do that. To just like claim the I don't know and I don't know, but I will help you find resources because that just, I think, instills more confidence in the person that you're working with because you being able to admit that you don't know, but that you're going to help them find the answer is huge.
Yeah, because no one can know everything. That's impossible.
No, be nice, but
I know. I wish. If only, if only, if only. Thinking, as we move to wrap up our conversation, thinking about parents sort of navigating and embracing and leaning into wherever their feeding journey takes them.
Mhm.
Is there anything you think that's key that we haven't touched on in our conversation?
Mm, I think just maybe we have touched on it, but to reinforce that there's so many unique factors and considerations in everyone's feeding journey, and that goals are different, cultural values are different,
Yes.
how quickly people have to go back to work is different, household to household, baby to baby, even like an exact same family may have a completely different situation with their second or
Mhm.
third baby. So, like, this is not only individual to families, but individual to babies. No two babies are alike in any feeding journey, which I think is really important for families to keep in mind because someone like you who had not a lot of struggles in their lactation journey may have a different experience with future babies. So it's important to know that going into it, and just expecting that things might be different so they don't go into it blindsided. Like it was so easy with my first baby and I didn't set up any support because I didn't expect any of this to be tricky.
Yeah. It is so important that it person to person, but also baby to baby
Yeah.
can be so different. Yeah, I feel like that is something everybody should be prepared for. With I feel like everything in parenting, right, is
Yes.
is different and that we should be educated by our previous experiences, but
Yeah.
not so tied to them that we're not ready for something different to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And recognize that, like, hey, just because your bestie can do this doesn't mean that you can do the same thing and have the same results also.
Yeah, and just that's a huge point too. Like it's not a comparison game, and with social media and all the things that people are constantly exposed to online, I think not comparing your journey to anyone else's is huge. Like you don't need a deep freezer full of milk to have enough milk to go back to work. I always use
Yes,
that as an example. So,
that's a good one. I feel like my biggest example on that is like from a sleep angle, how long you can go at night without milk removal.
mhm.
Just
Yes.
because your best friend can go a really long time doesn't without taking their supply doesn't mean that you
Yeah.
can go a really long time without taking your supply. Like
Yes.
so much variation
So much variation.
there, that I feel like we don't talk about enough when we talk about feeding or sleep,
Yeah.
that is so individual,
Yeah.
based on
Absolutely.
your own
That's a
feeding
great
history
one.
and storage capacity and supply resilience and
Hormone balance and
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
so much.
absolutely. Awesome. So to wrap up, What would you say to a parent whose feeding journey really hasn't gone the way they want and has some, feelings they need to process about that? Any sort of words of wisdom?
Yeah, just that it's really hard and that it's okay to have to take pivots, and just being a parent isn't easy, and adjusting to the role isn't easy, and learning to feed a baby isn't easy, and so much of it is outside of our control that, of course, process your feelings around it. Absolutely don't feel like your emotions aren't valid, because there's so much tied into our vision of ourselves as parents is tied into how we plan on feeding our children. So there is a lot of emotion that tends to get wrapped up in it. So process that emotion, talk about it, find support in working through it, but try to work through it. To try not to sit in the feelings of guilt or anxiety around feeding, and give yourself grace and know that it's okay for things to look different than what you planned on. Just like birth is, a lot of birth is outside of our control. A lot of what our body does with feeding and lactation is very outside of our control, and what's going on with our baby is outside of our control too. So we have two human beings coming together with a lot of factors that are out of our control. It's no wonder that things don't always go exactly as we hope they do.
I love that. That's so important, right? Process the emotions, but don't
Yeah.
get stuck,
Yeah.
right? Like really process so you can move through and like find the beauty in whatever that new journey is. Like
Yeah.
find the love of just being with your baby and not getting stuck in
Yeah.
the things.
Find the love, find the bonding. Your journey might
Right.
look different than you imagined, but you can still have the bonding and the love.
Yeah,
Mm.
I love that. I love that. I haven't had to do that with lactation. Like I said, mine went smoothly, but my birth did not. So
Oh
it's
my
the same
gosh.
process.
Very
So,
similar process. Yes.
it is absolutely the same process of kind of coping with what you can't control with, you
Yeah.
can't control and, making, I don't want to say making peace, but just kind of accepting and processing and then
Yeah.
moving forward.
Mhm.
I don't want to say moving on, but moving forward.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm going to get this info from you, but do you want to shout out where folks can find your work? And I know you said you had a YouTube channel and
Oh
your
yeah.
socials, your website, anything you want me to share.
Oh sure. So I'm on Instagram at Lactation for the People, and my YouTube is at Kassi, Kassireyes. And I will also send you a link. I don't know how many of your listeners are birth workers versus families, but I have a couple of free guides that I can share
Yeah.
for one or the other. So,
I mean, I'm happy to share both.
okay,
There might be both. I don't actually know.
cool.
Probably a mixture, more parents than birth workers, but I'm happy to share both either way.
Wonderful. I'll share the links
Awesome.
with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Cassie. This is such a great conversation.
Yes, this was awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.